We'll go back to file item 66, AB 753. Clerk will read.
Assembly Bill 753 by Assemblymember Monning, enacting to vehicle rentals.
Mr. Monning.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and members. I rise to present the Rachel and Jacqueline Houck Auto Rental Safety Act, which would prohibit rental car companies from renting or selling vehicles which are subject of a federal safety recall, once those companies have been notified by the manufacturer that the vehicle is the subject of recall. Once the vehicle has been repaired, the car can be rented out again. Existing federal and state laws have a loophole that allow rental car companies to rent out vehicles under recall, even though new dealer manufacturers are prohibited from selling new cars that are under the same safety recall. Under federal law, motor vehicles are subject to mandatory safety recalls for two reasons. They have a defect that poses an unreasonable risk to the public, and they fail to comply with mandatory federal safety standards. This bill is important to ensure that the Houck tragedy, where two sisters, Rachel and Jacqueline Houck, were killed while driving a recalled PT Cruiser rented from Enterprise, we want to make sure that tragedy is not visited on another family. Approximately 1 month before the Houck sisters were killed, Enterprise received notice from Chrysler that the PT Cruiser had a defective steering component that was prone to catch fire. Despite the warning, Enterprise rented the vehicle to the Houck sisters, and they perished in a fiery crash. The cause of the crash, admitted to by the rental car agency, the defective steering column. I want to acknowledge and be very clear that many of the rental car agencies have adapted policies to prevent this type of accident from happening in the future. But we need to ensure that rental car companies don't become complacent with their policies and rent out recalled vehicles, as well as to ensure that the smaller companies on smaller margins don't cut corners, but have a standard which they must uphold, the protection of the public, the protection that anybody puts their trust in the company to whom they proffer their rental money. Consumers need to know that when they rent a vehicle, it is safe for them and their family. That is the purpose of this bill. I respectfully ask for your aye vote.
Mr. Calderon.
I have to respectfully rise in opposition to the bill, not because it isn't a bill that's needed, but because it is a bill that just goes too far. It's just too broad. The tragedy that occurred needs to be addressed. But when you have a recall for a broken windshield, or windshield wiper, or as indicated in the analysis, a broken climate knob, does that merit the attention of this bill? Or what about if the parts aren't available to fix the recall? Or what if there's some temporary fix suggested by the manufacturer can forestall the risk or danger until a more permanent fix can be derived? But the point is, I mean, if this bill related to life-threatening defects, recalls that are life-threatening, that would make sense. If it were drafted to exclude windshield wipers, that would make sense. If it were drafted to address a situation, for instance, in Japan, you know, what if there's another recall, you know, on their Nissan or Toyota or whatever? How long would it take to get the parts from Japan now? So I think the bill is worthy of our support and demands our attention, but it has to, we can't be stampeded into drafting a bill that goes way beyond the danger that we're trying to address. And so with all respect, and I respect the author very, very much, and will support this bill on some level, but at this point would ask for a no vote.
Mr. Wagner.
Thank you, Madam Speaker and colleagues. I rise to join the majority leader in suggesting that the time is not right for this bill and that it needs a little bit more work. The Houks were in the Judiciary Committee testifying in favor of this bill. The family has suffered an unspeakable tragedy, and that is one to whom all of our hearts, no question, rightly go out. The problem with the bill, though, has been on one side addressed by the majority leader in how sweeping it is and reaches issues that perhaps it need not reach or that are unduly restrictive. I'd also like to suggest there's perhaps a problem on the other side as well, in that maybe if the logic of this bill were carried to its conclusion, there might be other vehicles that ought come off the road, vehicles owned and operated, for example, by our own state fleet. Our vehicles are completely exempted from this bill. If there's a significant issue here, we certainly would not want our state employees out on the road with vehicles subject to recall, but this bill doesn't address them. The reason this bill doesn't address them, I'm not sure, because the logic to apply it to rental cars certainly applies to state vehicles and other large fleet vehicles operating on the roads of California. And one last point with respect to the bill, there is a requirement that if, for example, a company has rented a car and the recall notice shows up later, the rental car company is under the obligation to track down the renter and swap out a vehicle. Do they need to go across state borders and do that? Does this bill apply if you rent a car in Nevada and drive it into California? The issues were raised in judiciary. I applaud the author's efforts to deal with those, but I don't think those issues have been addressed. And for the reasons of the over-inclusiveness addressed by the majority leader and some of the under-inclusiveness issues that I just raised, I'd urge a no vote and ask that perhaps we take a look at this at a later point. Thank you all.
Mr. Fuhr.
Thank you very much, Madam Speaker. I wasn't going to speak on the bill, but now I feel compelled to. The bill came through our committee in Judiciary. I'd like each member on the floor to contemplate their next family vacation and to think about your decision at a rental car station regarding the vehicle that you're selecting. And think about your kids, if you have kids, or your grandkids, as you're about to drive off in that vehicle. Without Mr. Monning's statute, you could be driving off in a vehicle that, as was the tragic case in the instance of the Houks, is subject to a safety recall. Let's be real. This bill doesn't say if there's a minor problem with the car. The bill pertains to safety deficiencies in the car. Now take yourself back to that exchange at the rental car desk. You're not told the vehicle is subject to a safety recall, and you drive off. And it turns out that the vehicle has a safety defect in it. We don't need to go further in that example. I think all of us would feel, as our constituents will feel when they hear about our votes on this bill, that you want to be protected from safety defects in your car. The analysis, the discussion pertains to things like windshield wipers. Yeah, if your windshield wipers don't work, that's a pretty significant safety defect when you're driving through a summer thunderstorm. If your defroster doesn't work and it's unseasonably cold at night in the mountains when you're on vacation, that's a pretty important safety problem for your family. I'm supporting this bill because I think it's important for us on the floor not to put ourselves in the shoes of the business entity which is conveying the vehicle that isn't safe to you, but to put yourself in the shoes of our constituents who are renting these vehicles. And it's through that lens that I urge we vote in favor of Mr. Monning's bill.
Mr. Dickinson. Mr. Solorio.
Thank you,